Steph and I talked about this for the story I did back in January, and his thing was like, yeah, I could be a role player. I could come off the bench.
There is something very wrong with the Golden State Warriors. Moses Moody just went down with one of the most horrific knee injuries I've seen that has clearly ended his season and might have a permanent impact on the rest of his career. On the surface, it seems the Warriors just can't catch a break. But could there be something else going on? The team's entire roster, from their 3 highest paid players onward, are suffering serious injuries in some capacity or another. For a team that prides itself on its medical staff as being among the best in the league, why does this keep happening? In Moses Moody's case, what's particularly frustrating for him is the fact that this is his first game back after a wrist injury originally sidelined him for the prior 10 games. The last time he played was March 2nd in a loss against the Clippers. Since then, the Warriors have only won 2 games. He was a crucial piece in the Warriors' recent win in Dallas, a game that went into overtime. Moody actually led the Warriors in scoring, while tying the team high in steals, giving them a well-needed boost on both ends of the floor. Without the added punch from the team's bench, however, things might have gotten uglier in Dallas. What happened? Check ball. Despite slightly edging the Dallas Mavericks in an overtime win, Moses Moody in his first game back after missing 10 games with a wrist injury sustains yet another injury that easily ends his season and will likely take significant time away from next season. This next bit might be a bit hard to watch. In a game that went to overtime, Moody steals the ball from Cooper Flagg and goes on a fast break run. Upon planting his foot to go up for a dunk, he seemingly catastrophically ruptures his patella tendon in gruesome fashion. Up until this point, there had been no indication that Moody was under any duress and had played a total of 34 minutes. He had a team-leading 23 points on 8 of 20 from the field and 4 of 11 from 3, 3 assists, 3 steals, and 2 blocks. While the thoughts and prayers should focus heavily on his recovery and eventual return, one can't help but wonder, could this have been prevented? Upon return, Steve Kerr immediately thrust Moody back into the starting lineup. After missing 10 games, being tasked with guarding the opposing team's best player, Cooper Flagg, and enough workload to be the team's leading scorer could have possibly taken a toll on Moody. This is without even mentioning the overtime factor, which, as I noted before, it was during this segment that the injury happened. This seems to be a common occurrence going back as far as 2019, as players return from injuries to the Warriors lineup, KD with his calf strain, Klay Thompson with a torn ACL, D'Anthony Melton a few years ago, Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry, and the list goes on. Interestingly enough, this mirrors Jonathan Kuminga's return to the floor in January of this year as well, where shortly after his return from 16 DNPs, he succumbs to an injury. This rapid removal of players from high-intensity and fast-paced gameplay for weeks or months, only to thrust them back in without proper ramping up protocols, is a recipe for disaster. It seems, however, that this is what's happening. While there could be any number of reasons for these injuries, it's not difficult to conclude that over-reliance on the team's older vets led to their injuries, which then led to over-reliance on the team's backup players leading to theirs. It's also evident that the players mostly affected by these injuries are typically the more explosive players on the court, or skill sets that are often utilized to a higher extent. This goes back to the medical staff and coaching. Why isn't there more cohesion and competence between the two? Add in the apparent lack of thoroughness in the evaluation of Porzingis' situation, and the Warriors may need to take a look internally at what's going wrong with the health of their players. If the medical staff are doing their best, it might be time to evaluate this playing style that is seemingly wearing the team's best players thin. Steve Kerr has been known to have players out of position and most awkwardly undersized in an attempt to field quote-unquote higher IQ players, which usually results in smaller players who didn't have the athleticism to succeed at the lower levels and instead had to find creative ways to gain an edge. The problem is, by the time they get to this level, those athletic players with enough reps begin to catch up eventually. We see this playing out in real time as other teams catch up to the Warriors' style of play and the ball movement doesn't really get Steph Curry open. While his shots are still very efficient, the toll remains and affects not just him, but every other player on the team through a cascading effect. The Warriors aren't an isolated case, as the Grizzlies are suffering with, at the time of this recording, 11 injuries, making their roster just barely playable. With 15 roster spots and 3 two-way slots, they have just enough players to not forfeit a game. Typically, a team that is fully rostered isn't allowed to sign a player on a 10-day contract. However, that changes with a hardship exception due to excessive injuries. Now here comes the big question. Considering the current state of the team, the excessive injuries, the aging squad, style of play, etc., what do the Warriors do for Steph Curry, who's almost set for a return, and how will all this affect next year? Let's start with Curry's return. Steph has been ramping up on-court activities. The recent injury to Moses Moody deals a significant blow to the Warriors' aspirations of doing anything this postseason. They're down one of their best shooters and defenders, making an already bleak future look even more damning. Next is the risk of injury. After seeing what happened to Moody, is it wise to put Steph Curry back on the floor and risk an injury on a season that has no hope? The risk of injury is clear. Players who've been sitting have come back into the lineup only to go out with yet another injury. Curry's age isn't doing him any favors, and more than likely, with this injury to Moody, Steph will be under a lot more duress. The playing style will compound the issue, and there's absolutely zero benefit for Steph Curry. Imagine you're Steph Curry, and your second man in a playoff run is Kristaps Porzingis, with maybe 30 games played by the end of the regular season while playing through 3 debilitating injuries, and your third most prominent player actually hurts the team whenever he's on the floor. Your 4th best player is going to come off the bench behind him, and your 5th best player is starting next to you in the backcourt and hasn't shown that he has any ability to impact the opposing team's defense. All this considered, taxing what's left of this team this year for what amounts to be a pointless run at this point amounts to an unnecessary tax on what's available for next year. Speaking of next year, considering the number of injuries and the fact that players struggled with age-related issues in a year they are younger, in a league that prioritizes youth, and the championship teams in the last 3 years have only been approaching peak performances during each run, things are starting to become clear. There's no reason to set high expectations for this year or next. The team in its current configuration is not likely to compete for a championship in either year, so here's what to expect. This season will likely end with sparse appearances and low loading/injury management for Steph Curry, resulting in a loss during the play-in. The following season will likely start out on a positive note, but will largely follow the pattern of this current season. Jimmy's return will be unlikely to push this team beyond another year in the play-in tournament, and at best, a first-round exit. So take it for what it is, a ride off into the sunset and a reset to begin next summer. That reset will likely take the form of Steph Curry being in a secondary role behind whichever player the Warriors are able to select in a draft as they open up cap room with Butler's and Green's contracts going off the books. Alternatively, they might choose to go with trading for an up-and-coming player.
Steph and I talked about this for the story I did back in January, and his thing was like, yeah, I could be a role player. I could come off the bench.
The salary slots for Jimmy Butler and Kristaps Porzingis are pretty enticing. While Green will likely stay on in a bench role, Steph will still be a starter, but more than likely there will be a different coach at the helm at that time. That means Steve Kerr will likely re-sign with the team for 1 additional year. Let me know your thoughts on Moses Moody's injury. It's not as bad as Sean Livingston's, and he managed to return to eventually play, but obviously a shell of who he was as a player. Does Moody's injury change your perspective on Steph returning this season? What about the outlook for next season and the impending rest for the Warriors next year? Post your thoughts in the comments below. And if you liked the video, don't forget to click that like button, hype the video, and subscribe to the channel to help promote the content. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Swish.